What is up? All right, so today we're going to build a slider component like this. We're going to use my favorite slider library. It's called Flickity. And it's great because it's easy to configure, it's lightweight, and it works really well on your phone and anything that's touch responsive. I've used this library tons of times. Here is a use case for it. It's one of our clients. They used it in this one above too. Yeah, this is also Flickity. Yep. Here's another. Yeah, you can configure it in lots of different ways, different animations. It's just really nice to work with. So for this video, we're going to do like a quick and dirty way where all the code is going to be in one file that we're going to add to the theme via, if we go up here to edit code, then that's where I am over here. So you don't have to open up a local code editor or anything like that. That way you can have something just to work with, to play with, and then we'll refine it. We'll make it a little bit more performant and a little bit more configurable. So yeah, so that's what we're going to do. All right, let's create a new liquid file. Call it flickityslider.liquid. All right, and we will start framing out our HTML. Do this class of Flickity slider. We probably want a heading here. We can make this dynamic, but we'll just say slider for now. And then we need to create our carousel class. Carousel. And we're going to bind the Flickity JavaScript to this div element. So this carousel will have a number of divs inside of it, which will make tiny class carousel. This needs this. And we'll just say slide for now. And then we'll improve on this. Now that we have our HTML mocked up, we're going to create a schema. And the schema will let us register this component inside Shopify so we can add it to the page. It also lets us set up a bunch of configuration options and dynamic data. So we will create our schema tag. So the schema, and then we'll close it and schema. And a schema is just a JavaScript object, a bunch of settings, and we got to call it something. So we'll call it Flickity slider, and we can tell it what tag to use when it injects the component into the page. So we could use any sort of HTML tag. We could use a div or an aside, article footer. This is a section, so let's use a section. And then we use settings, but we'll come back to this because this is where we're going to make different things dynamic, like the heading and then all the individual slides. But just so we can get this loaded on the page, we're going to skip this for a second. We're going to go down and create presets. The presets allow us to preload a section with a number of things. But right now, just to get this to work, the only one that's required is name. Call that kitty. Oh, wait. Whoops. This needs to be object. Yeah. Right. Name. Slider. So we'll save this. And then our editor reloads. So now we can search for Flickity slider and add it to the page. It's very basic. It doesn't really do much, but we can save this, and in our preview, it's right here. Now that we have this component loaded on the page, we can create our first dynamic element. So here in our schema, we can add settings. And we're going to create a setting for heading. This is going to be text, and we're going to give it an ID so we know how to reference it. We're going to call it heading. And then we're going to give it a label of heading. This is what's going to show up in the theme editor. And then we'll give it a default value of feature slider. So now that this is defined, go up here and dynamically inject that data. This is a section, so we'll start by referencing section dot settings dot heading. So if we save this, our theme editor reloads. If we click the slider, we now have an editable field. You call this slide show. But that's the basics of creating a dynamic value. And then we could do something like this, where we'll write some liquid code and say, if section dot settings dot heading does not equal blank, then we'll show this. And we have to end our if clause. And so when we save this, if we, for whatever reason, didn't want to have a heading, we removed it, it would disappear. Perfect. We'll go ahead and add slider back in. But this way we can have conditional elements that hide or show different things based on logic that we give it. So the next step is to add some slides. And because we want them to be dynamic, we're going to set up blocks. And blocks can be added into a section. So first we will add a new element in our schema of blocks. That's an array of objects, where we want the block to be. So this will be a type of slide, and then a name slide, capital slide. And we need a comma down here. And then, because we want to render a bunch of these cells, let's say for block in section dot blocks, and then we'll end our for loop. And right, so we save this. Now our Flickity slider lets us add slides, and each slide that we add will just create one of these. And add another one. All right, now obviously we want these slides to be images. So let's configure that. Let's add properties to our block. Settings, also an array of objects. And the first one is going to be an image. What we're going to use for this is an image picker. I'm going to give it an image. That's how we're going to reference it in the code. And a label of the image. And then we also want, maybe we won't use it right this second, but if we were going to use this in any production theme, we would want alt text to accompany the image. ID alt text. So now that we have these new settings, we can go ahead and save and reload our editor. And now we can select images. So if I select a random image, and then For this one, let's select another image. I'm going to leave alt text blank for now. Now we have images configured for our slides, but we're not actually rendering it in the code. Now we have to create an image tag. So let's just get rid of this slide real quick and we'll create image tag. And what do we want in here? Well, it needs a source. Ooh, actually, what I forgot is we need to get our block variables. We'll write some liquid code. This just makes the code a little bit easier to read. So we'll assign this variable B to block.settings, which is block settings. And then we'll access our image and our alt. So we're looping through all the blocks. And for each block, we're going to get the block's settings. And then we'll say source equals B dot image. And we actually need to access the final asset URL, which we do by referencing image URL. And if you hover over it, you can see some information about it. We can also provide a width and height. We won't do this right this second, but I'll come back and show you exactly how that works. We'll do alt, which is alt. Loading, it's going to be lazy, so it's non-blocking. And just to make the image tag happy, we'll say height is auto and width is auto. We'll come back and change this here in a second. All right, let's save this. We'll save this, just reload it. All right, we have two images here, but they're enormous. So let's fix this. So let's start by just setting the width to 200. Save this. That's better. Now, if we look at the preview and we right click on the image and inspect it, you can see that this image is actually 590 by 590. So if we want it to be a little bit more performant, we can come back to this image URL and we can set a width of 200. Then if we save this, reload, then you can see that now Shopify has added this query parameter to the URL in its CDN, which outputs the image as 200, which is very, very useful and just more performant. So that's a great thing to have in your back pocket. So we have we have two slides rendering right now, but if we were to add another slide, it would be nice if there was a placeholder here. We're going to write some logic and say, if b.image does not equal blank, then render this thing right here, which is the image, else go ahead and close and if, and then this will be a placeholder. Slide. Now, if we add another slide and it doesn't have an image, at least it says something here. We can configure this with a background and the right height, width, so it looks like a proper placeholder image. So we'll do that in a minute. Before we start styling our placeholder, and honestly, this whole thing, we need to style this. But before we do that, let's adjust our presets and add some blocks in here. That way, it will look more like slider with a bunch of preset blocks inside of it. Type, because we define this slide type up here, now we can say, hey, when we drop this section onto the page, it's going to preload it with all of these blocks of type slide. So it's just going to preload it with a bunch of slides. And let's do maybe 7. do that. And we might have to remove this section and drop it back on the page. Yeah, let's do that. So we can go up here and delete our slider, and then we'll add it back in. Yep. So now it has added 7 slides. It doesn't look like a slide yet, but we're going to fix that. All right, so I think it's time to actually load the Flickity slider. And we'll do that by going to the Flickity documentation and copying this script tag. Place it here. And we'll add defer to it so that it won't block any of the other elements from loading on the page. And what we'll end up doing is writing some code that will let this load in the background. And then once everything's fully loaded, then it will appear on the page. So that's what the final result will be like. So in order to get this code to connect to our carousel, we're going to have to write an initialization function. So we'll create a script tag that we can write some JavaScript. Let's start with just a general initialization function. And we'll write a console log. Let's create another function that initializes the carousel. So we'll say once will always here. Oh, man, I can spell. And now we can get our carousel. Let's care. So we'll do and query here. And we get it by this class, which is specified right here. And then if for some reason Flickity has already been bound to this carousel, then we will bail out of this function because we won't need to do anything. So if that already exists, then we'll just return. Otherwise, we'll carry on and create a configuration object to tell Flickity how we want the slider to function. So we'll say Flickity dig equals this JavaScript object. So one center to through wrap around through on way bonus addable through it's through. Actually, we'll turn this. There's also page dots. Page dots. Bidding false. We'll turn those on later. Images loaded through and index of 1. That's all we need, I think. Then new Flickity. We'll give it carousel and Flickity fig. This references the Flickity library, which is pulled in here, and then binds this carousel and initializes it. All right, cool. So we have our initialize carousel function, and then I do this. If window.Flickity exists, the library has been loaded onto the page, then initialize the carousel. Otherwise, we're going to listen for a window event. Window.add hint listener. We're going to listen for the load event. Page is fully loaded. And then when it is fully loaded, we'll try to run this initialize carousel function. And we only want that to happen. I think that's all we need here. And then we can run the function. Or initialize. And save. Ooh, looks like it worked. Now, all the slides are bunched together, so it doesn't really look like a slider, but it's a good start. So while we're here, we're going to add a couple more things. We'll create another function. We'll call it destroy. So if this component is removed from the page, we want to destroy it. We'll say cancel on destroying slider. We use the same code to get the carousel. And then carousel, if it doesn't have Flickity object on the carousel, then we'll just return. And if it doesn't have this destroy object on it, also return. Now, once we've tested for those, we can write carousel Flickity dot just. All right. So now that we have these two functions, we're going to bind them to some event listeners that are specific to the Shopify theme editor. First one is going to be when we load a section onto the theme editor. So we'll say document dot event listener. And the event is called Shopify section load. And when we load a section onto the page, we will initialize Flickity. Now we're going to write a similar function, document.add listener for Shopify section. And this is just a shorthand for anonymous function. So it's just going to run this function that calls destroy Flickity. So let's save this. And then when we reload the page here, we can inspect our console. And when we add Flickity slider, it initializes it. And when we destroy it, it destroys it. Perfect. All right, so let's add it back in. Beautiful. All right, I don't need this console anymore. Back over here. Now we can start styling it. So we have our Flickity slider loaded, but currently it doesn't really look much like a slider. So we can go ahead and add the default CSS styles from the Flickity documentation. Go ahead and copy this link tag, this here. And I realize this name conflicts with some default styling in here. So what I'm actually going to do is change this to just slider. And then I can start adding some styles. So I'll throw in a style tag. Style. And the first thing I want to style is each actual slide, which is this thing. So they're not all mushed together. I'll start with, I'm going to scope it under the slider class. Say cell. And then let's go with width of 200, height 200, and maybe a background color of like all white. Is that much? And 0. Get a bit of margin of just 5 pixels on either side. Ooh, all right. Now it's starting to look like a slider. So I'm seeing some like weird shadowing going on here when I touch it. Yeah, those are some default focus styles. So let's go ahead and get rid of those. So we can do slider, carousel, and then focus visible. And we will, I believe it's outline done, clocks, add, one, and text. So it's definitely looking better. What else do we need? So if we expand this, oh yeah, it's not centering correctly. Well, this JavaScript is, but the actual slider itself isn't. It's at a max width here. So the slider is gonna have max width of 1200 pixels. I believe that's what the rest of them are. And then margin, let's see, auto to center at, and then at least at the smaller sizes, adding 8 pixels, top and 20 left and right. Let's see what that looks like. Let's see what it looks like on device. So that lines up, and I forget what a iPad is. iPad mini looks good. Ooh, but then it's off there, so 750. Yeah, okay. So now we can go in and add a media query. We'll say add media, again width of 750 pixels. Meet this crease. We'll say slider. We'll have padding of 50. So I think that will fix it. That looks better. Yeah, okay. We're getting somewhere. I'm gonna zoom this. So let's make this placeholder look a bit better. Which is this to be display flex, and that will make this slide flex into the center, and then just understand. So actually, let me just show you. So if I come up here and I go to this placeholder, so this is what we're styling. I can add some elements to it. Say display flex, which doesn't immediately do anything, but you can see now it flexes the whole width of its parent container. So now we can say justify content center, which will center it. And then we can say height 100%, which doesn't do anything yet, but then we can say align item center, and then that will center it. Copy these, paste here, and stop, and say resend this. Look at that. Looks a little prettier. Let's add some images and see what this actually looks like. I like it. Let's add another one. Not bad. Now, this works out well because the images are 200 by 200 and the cell is 200 by 200. What happens if we add an image, or if we don't have an image that's exactly 200 by 200? What do we do then? Let's add a slide with an image that's not 200 by 200. I think this one's like 500 by something. So you can see it doesn't look great. Well, we can fix that. Let's create other sound, do a slider, and actually put it up here. This is where the other style is. Then want to target the image, and then we can say object fit cover. But it's not actually going to have the effect we want until we add a height property, 100%. There we go. This image is wider than it is tall, but if it was taller than it is wide, then we would want to use maybe like a width of 100%. It doesn't really affect things in this case, but it's good to put this in here. And then there's another property that kind of goes along with object fit, and that's object position. And we can move this around, but typically we want to just center it. All right. So we can copy these here, fix indentation, and save, resend. Okay. That's looking pretty good. So our slider is looking pretty good, but there's still this effect on load where it has to load the library and then it actually switches from vertical to horizontal. Doesn't look great. So let's fix that. These products below load with a bit of opacity animation. So let's do the same thing with this. Let's go up here and we will add carousel. We're going to start by giving this carousel an opacity of 0. We save this. It should be essentially hidden. Okay, great. And then slider carousel. What we're going to do is in JavaScript, once it finishes loading Flickity, then we're going to add a class to it of loading. And then opacity will become 1. Now, this isn't going to take effect yet because we need to adjust the JavaScript. So down here, after Flickity is initialized, we'll say carousel class list add load, and save this. And this should wait a second, and then it should appear. There it goes. Now we can make this a bit more fluid by giving this an animation. So passively, and then 3 seconds is much better. I like it. It's a serious improvement. There's a couple things in here that I wanted to add. One is right now there's no next or previous buttons. You really just have to know to grab and slide. I mean, this will work on touchscreens, but there's still no visual indicator that you can do this. Flickity has some default page dots and previous next buttons that we can style ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these on. True. And this is what they look like by default. They're not terrible, but they're not great. So let's adjust these. Slider. They're called Flickity page dots. And we can look at that by just selecting them. And this is just part of the standard Flickity JavaScript and CSS. And so you can see there's a ordered list with a class of Flickity page dots and then a list item with just a class of dot. Go back and we'll say, actually, we just need to style the dot. So let's say background color of 666, and then width of 10 pixels, and then a height of 5 pixels, even a margin and 0 and 5 pixels, and a border radius of 0, so they're square or rectangular. There we go. That looks a bit cooler. Now we need to fix this slider and Flickity previous next button. Background none. Order is also none. To remove some styles for the pseudo element of focus, which would be an outline of none and a box shadow. That will fix it. That looks much better. Now I want to add cursor pointer so that it'll show a little pointer when you hover over it. And once I can change the style a little bit, I'll change the color to 666 to match the other. All right. And that should cover it. Now, let's say we wanted to put 2 sliders on a page. Well, it's not going to work as it stands right now. And the reason is because there's going to be multiple carousels that have this class on them. Because we're in a liquid template, we can access the section that's getting rendered. For instance, if I wanted to see what that section ID looks like, I could put it here in the title. I could say section.id, and we'll see what it looks like. So there is our section ID. These numbers and, these names don't really matter to us that much, but they let us distinguish 2 different sliders between each other. So I want to remove this. I can use this section ID to distinguish between these different sliders. I could, instead of using this class to find this carousel, I can look it up by its ID. Let me give this carousel an ID instead. I could say carousel-section ID. I can save that. And then when I render the slider, I can look at the carousel component, which is right here. And now it has an ID of carousel template 17335, etc. So now I can grab that same pattern, which is right here, and I can alter query. So I can say fonts carousel tools document kit element ID. And I believe we're using that in one other place down here. Now I should be able to create multiple sliders. Beautiful. Problem solved. All right, now this works and you can absolutely use it, but it's not the most efficient way to do it. The 2 things that I would change here are the styles and the JavaScript. That's kind of why we're getting these warnings here. They're not red squiggly, so they're not errors, but it's a warning. And if you hover over it, it says this asset should be served by the Shopify CDN for better performance. If we go into the HTML and we look at this template, we can see here's our carousel, here's our slider, and here's our section. So there's a slider, but then here's this link tag right here. And then here's the styles that we wrote. And here's the script tag and the JavaScript. It's all just shoved into this component, which means when the browser is parsing the HTML, it has to stop and compute these things, as opposed to having one JavaScript file that is compiled of all the different JavaScript functions and classes and libraries that exist for the theme, and then having one style file where all the styles are compiled. And that's what you really want. You want to have styles and JavaScript all compiled into two separate files, because the less files the browser has to load, then the faster it's going to render the page, and the less issues you're going to have with, things shifting as the page is loading. So we are going to adjust these scripts to account for this and to make it a bit more performant and to be a long-term strategy. Now, the only caveat to this is that you will be maintaining these theme files. And if you were to update your theme, any of these custom files that you have are going to be overridden. So you need to make sure that hey, this Flickity slider, like, you wrote this and it's not part of the standard theme. Also, like, we're going to create assets for the CSS and the JavaScript. And what I would do is I would create just a folder on your computer and put these files in it and make some notes. So if you do have to update the theme for any reason, you can come back, copy these files back into your theme and use them. All right, now you have a working Flickity slider that you can play with and adjust. If you have any other questions about it, you want me to make some alterations, or you have a different use case, you want the images to scale a little bit differently, let me know and I'll try to help you out. Thanks. So this works, but it's lacking in a few different areas. One of the main things that I would do, let's see, how would I improve this? Whoops. How would I improve this? Well, probably the first thing I would do is move these base CSS and JavaScript files into the assets folder. These don't need to be loaded inside the component. And if we add multiple components, it's multiple link references, it's just not a good idea. So let's do that real quick. Let's go to our assets and we'll create a new file called Flickity CSS. And nothing's there yet. But what we'll do is we can go to this URL for the CSS in our browser. And there it is. And we can just copy it and paste it right in here. We'll save that. And then we'll create another file for Flickity JS. We'll again go down to our reference, copy this. Good. And browser. This one's a little bit bigger, but it's pretty much the same process. Copy all this and paste it here. So now that those are saved, we can add them to our theme. So this is the base HTML for the theme. This is the top level component in the theme. It's under layout. In this particular theme, it's under layout in theme. And what we'll do is load that file into, actually, we got to just do this. Copy, paste, and then change this. And then do the same thing for the CSS. It'll look pretty much like this, but we'll add it to the bottom. Flickity CSS. And now we can go back to here and make sure this works. Wonderful. All right. So the next thing you're going to want is, well, what if we want to style different sliders differently? How would we do that? Or what if we want one to have page dots and the other not to have page dots? Well, we can do that pretty easily by adding more settings to the section. So if I wanted to say, okay, let's add a type. This will be a checkbox. And ID. Show and page dots. Actually, this is snake case or lowercase with underscores. Shows label force show. Okay, that's and default will be false. And then here we can just use our tags and say section settings show page dots. Then they show, and they don't. It's great. Now, the other thing that we would probably want to do is maybe style these slightly differently. Now, if we just try to say, what do we want to do? Maybe like max width and try that. So type this. What is doing? Number. ID will be advanced. Weird. label. Good. And default will be 1200. Now, this will make this configurable. We can do this. Section dot settings dot max. Let me make sure the syntax is right. Cool. It works. All right. Now we're the problem is that it'll basically affect every single slider. So the one thing that we would need to adjust is give a class. Well, how do we want to do this? Yeah, because we have everything scoped on this slider, then we'll give this slider an ID, just like we did for the carousel below, and just say, oh, I guess we can copy, paste, and then load it. And so then we can take this Prev. There we go. So then we can take this. Let's do this. We can make each one of these dynamic. Now they will be equally scoped. Oh, I broke something. Oh, I forgot. Another this is no longer class. This is now an ID. There we go. I should fix it. You're in it. Now we can add another slider. And one can have page tabs, and the other one not. And then this one can also be wide, or pixels wide, and this one not. Sweet. All right, so that pretty much covers everything. I would ship this. Now, one last thing to think about is that, these modifications that we've made to the theme. So we've created a new file here for this Flickity slider, and we've created JavaScript files and CSS files for Flickity right here. And then we've made modifications to the theme.liquid file to utilize these style and JavaScript files. So if you were to ever update your theme, these might get overridden. So it's something to be aware of. And once you start making big modifications to your theme, you often don't want to upgrade it. Or you want to make detailed notes about what you've changed so you can come back and add those changes back in if they get overridden for some reason. So at some point I can go through a different pattern for modifying your theme. We're doing it live, essentially. Not live, but we're doing it through the Shopify user interface and their theme editor, which makes it quick and easy. But that's the trade-off, is you're more susceptible. The workflow allows you, it makes it a bit more difficult to upgrade, and it makes it a bit more difficult to track changes over time. So it's something to keep in mind. All right. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what you guys think.